Wyoming Territory, 1882. It was the kind of dry June heat that made the dust hang in the air like smoke when Francesca Rourke stepped down from the stagecoach in the town of Dry Creek, her boots hitting the packed earth with more weight than most women carried. She adjusted her hat against the sun and squared her shoulders, ignoring the stares. They always stared. Francesca wasn't small. She had curves that filled out every inch of her traveling dress, arms sturdy from years of kneading dough and hauling firewood, and a face that flushed easier than she liked. Her aunt in Illinois used to say she had a good, kitchen-warmed look, but out here, where prairie girls were thin as fence rails and always quiet, it felt more like a curse. She was 23, unmarried, and alone. Worse, she was supposed to be married by now. The man who'd written her sweet letters for nearly a year, a rancher named Thomas from Dry Creek, had taken one look at her when she stepped off the coach and decided he had made a mistake. He never even came to meet her. Sent a boy with a note instead. She crumpled the letter in her fist and tossed it into the dirt. Francesca Rourke, a voice called from nearby. She turned, startled. A tall man in a dust-stained hat leaned against the hitching post by the general store. His shirt was worn but clean, sleeves rolled to his elbows, and he had the kind of rough, sun-worn face that only came from tending land for years. His dark hair curled slightly at the edges of his collar. "That's me," she said, chin lifting. "I heard what happened," he said, voice steady. "Name's Rowan Whitlock. My ranch is west of town, near the Elk River. I was in town for supplies when I overheard the station master talking." She looked him over. He was older than she'd expected, maybe in his 30s, and had a sadness in his eyes that didn't match the rest of him. "I do not need pity," she said. "Wasn't offering it," Rowan replied. "I got two young uns who lost their mother last winter. I got a ranch that needs a woman's touch. I am not looking for a beauty queen or a social butterfly. I need someone strong, someone who will stay." Francesca blinked. "You want to marry me? I want to give you a place to land," he said. "If we suit, we can marry. If not, I will pay your fare to wherever you want to go next. But I could use the help now." She couldn't speak for a long second. Her hands were trembling. "Why me?" she finally whispered. Rowan looked straight at her. "Because you did not cry when he rejected you. Because you stood up straight when the whole town turned to look. That takes grit." Francesca studied him, weighing the offer. She knew desperation. She had not come all this way to crawl back east with nothing. And something about the honesty in his voice pulled at her chest. "I will come," she said. "But I am not going to be your cook and nanny for free. You treat me fair, I will work hard." Rowan nodded once. "Fair deal." They rode back to the ranch in his wagon, a long stretch of silence between them filled only with the creak of wheels and the distant hum of cicadas. The land rolled out in wide golden hills, and the Elk River glinted like silver in the distance. When they arrived, two children ran out from the porch of a modest clapboard house. A girl with long brown braids, and a boy with a missing front tooth and scuffed boots. "Etta, Elijah," Rowan called, climbing down. "This here is Miss Francesca. She will be staying with us for a while." Etta, about 10, stared at Francesca with guarded eyes. Elijah, younger, offered a crooked grin. "Do you cook?" he asked. "I do," Francesca said, setting her carpetbag down. "Do you eat?" He nodded, satisfied. That night, she cooked stew and biscuits with what she found in the pantry. The kitchen was a mess, but she made do. Rowan helped wash the dishes after, sleeves rolled up, arms strong from work. "You do not talk much," she said. "I talk when there is something worth saying," he replied. She looked at him from across the table. "And was today worth saying?" He glanced at her, then the children finishing their stew in the corner. "I think it might have been." Francesca slept in the spare bedroom. The bed creaked, but the sheets were clean. She stared at the ceiling a long time, unsure what to make of this strange twist in her life. No one had ever chosen her before. By the end of the week, she knew the rhythm of the ranch. She mended clothes, baked bread, helped Elijah with his letters, and brushed at his hair in the evenings. Rowan worked the fields, broke a new horse, repaired the chicken coop. Always quiet, but never cold. One morning, Francesca found Etta crying behind the barn. She knelt beside her, brushing dirt from the girl's cheek. "What is wrong, sweetheart?" Etta sniffled. "Mama used to braid my hair. You do it different." Francesca's heart ached. She sat down in the grass and pulled the girl into her lap. "I do not want to be your mama," she said gently. But I do care about you. A lot. Etta leaned into her. You smell like cinnamon. Francesca laughed softly. That is a good thing, I hope. Later that week, Rowan came in from the fields with a cut on his arm. Francesca cleaned it without fuss. You should wear gloves, she scolded, wrapping the cloth tight. He washed her hands. You are not what I expected. She looked up. Neither are you. He smiled, just a little. That is not a bad thing. Weeks passed. Etta stopped flinching when Francesca hugged her. Elijah asked her to read to him every night. Rowan started sitting beside her on the porch after supper, watching the sky go dark. One night, after the children had gone to bed, he looked at her and said, This feels right. You here. She swallowed. It does. He reached for her hand, rough and warm against hers. I buried a woman I loved, he said. I never thought I would feel something again. Francesca's eyes welled with tears. No one ever wanted me, she whispered. Not like this. I do. His voice cracked. I want you. She leaned in, forehead against his. I want you too. And in that quiet evening, with stars blinking above and the wind rustling the cottonwoods, something settled between them. Solid. Real. Something like love. By late July, the wheatgrass had turned brittle and gold along the river's edge, and the last of the spring calves were old enough to graze without their mothers hovering close. Francesca stood at the clothesline near the back stoop, her hands red from wringing out shirts, when Rowan rode in from the north pasture with a stranger trailing behind him on horseback. The man was younger, with a smooth face and polished boots that didn't belong to any rancher she'd met. Francesca watched them dismount, her fingers tightening on the clothespins. Rowan approached with his usual quiet step, brushing sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. Francesca, this here's Jasper Klein. He's the new field hand I hired on for the hay season. He'll be sleeping in the old bunkhouse. Jasper offered a quick nod, eyes flicking over her like he wasn't sure what to make of her. Ma'am. She nodded back, already disliking the way he lingered on her figure. Supper's at 6. If you're late, you eat cold. Rowan's mouth twitched as he led Jasper toward the barn. Once they were out of earshot, Francesca let out a slow breath and returned to the wash. That night, she didn't speak much at the table, but her hands moved steady through the motions, passing the cornbread, ladling stew, collecting empty bowls. Rowan watched her, but said nothing until the children had gone to bed. He's no trouble, he said, leaning against the porch railing, oil lamp between them casting long shadows. Just needs a season's work and a roof. I don't care if he sleeps in the hayloft, Francesca murmured, gaze fixed on the darkened hills. But if he looks at me like that again, I'll throw dishwater in his lap. Rowan let out a low chuckle, rough and warm. Noted. Silence stretched, but it was easy now. Not tense, not uncertain like before. Francesca rested her chin in her palm, eyes half-lidded. You ever think about building onto the house? She asked, voice soft. Rowan shifted. You mean for more space? She nodded. Etta's getting older. She'll want her own room soon. Elijah needs shelves for all those wood carvings he's been making. He rubbed the back of his neck. I've thought about it. Just wasn't much reason until now. She looked at him then, quiet but steady. There's reason now. Rowan's hand brushed hers where it rested on the railing. He didn't press, just let it sit there, slow and sure. I'll draw up some plans, he said. The next morning, Francesca took Etta into town with her for the first time. The girl had outgrown her boots, and Francesca had promised her something new if she helped mend the chicken fence without complaint. At the mercantile, Etta lingered near a display of hair ribbons, running her fingers over a pale yellow one. You like it? Francesca asked. Etta shrugged, but her eyes stayed on the ribbon. They had a box of them back east, Francesca said. But I never wore one. I thought they made my neck look shorter. You don't need one, Etta said earnestly. You're pretty without it. Francesca blinked, throat tightening. She bought the ribbon without another word and tied it into the girl's braid on the wagon ride home. That evening, Jasper stayed out by the barn longer than usual, oiling tack and pretending not to watch the house. Rowan noticed it too. He came in with dust on his boots and a stiffness in his shoulders. He's not used to women like you, Rowan said, drying his hands by the sink after supper. Like me? Francesca asked, arching a brow. Women who matter, Rowan said simply. Who change a place just by being in it. Francesca turned toward him, drying the last plate. You think I've changed this place? He stepped closer. I think you've changed everything. She didn't answer with words. Just reached up and laid her hand against his chest, over the worn fabric of his shirt, where the beat of his heart was strong and steady. He covered her hand with his. Later, she sat beside Etta by the fire. The girl leaned against her hip, eyes heavy with sleep. Elijah sat cross-legged on the rug, carving a bird with his small jackknife, chips of wood scattered around him like feathers. Rowan entered quietly, pausing in the doorway. He watched them for a moment, then crossed the room and knelt beside the boy. That's coming along, he said. Elijah looked up. Miss Francesca said I should carve something for the mantel. Rowan's eyes lifted to hers. That's so. She nodded. A home ought to show the hands that built it. He stood slowly and offered her a hand. She took it, and he led her out to the porch without a word. The moon was low and full, casting silver light across the fields. Rowan turned to her, his face unreadable in the dark. I never expected to feel peace again. Francesca's thumb brushed over his fingers, her voice steady. And now I can't imagine waking without you here. She stepped closer, her breath catching. Rowan, if you mean to ask me, you don't need to wait. He didn't speak, just pulled her into him, his lips finding hers with the gentleness of a man who knew loss and had found something worth holding on to. When they parted, his forehead rested against hers, his breath warm. I'll ask proper in the morning. But tonight, I needed to show you. Francesca smiled against him, heart full. You already did. Inside, the fire crackled low, and the children slept soundly. The house no longer felt borrowed. It felt like belonging. The morning Rowan asked her was quiet. A thin fog clung to the fields, softening the sound of hooves and the creak of the porch boards beneath his boots. He didn't bring flowers or kneel. Instead, he held out a simple iron ring that had once belonged to his mother, the band worn smooth by time. Francesca took it with both hands, holding it like something sacred. I'll wear it, she said, voice steady. I'll be yours. They married at the edge of the Elk River with only Pastor Green, the children, and the cottonwoods as witnesses. Etta wore that yellow ribbon, and Elijah wore a vest too big for him, the pockets stuffed with scraps of carved cedar. Before the vows, Rowan took Francesca's hands and looked at her like he saw every part of her, every scar, every bit of strength she never thought anyone would notice. You've built a home here, he said, not loud, but clear. And I want to build the rest of my life inside it. When the pastor asked him to speak the words, Rowan did so without hesitation. Francesca's voice shook when she gave hers, but not from fear. It was something else, something like certainty. After the ceremony, they sat under the sycamore while the children skipped stones across the water. Francesca leaned into his shoulder, her bonnet in her lap, the ring glinting faintly on her finger. I never imagined it would feel this easy, she said. It isn't, Rowan replied. But it's right. That night, she moved into his room, now theirs. The bed was wide enough, but it felt smaller with his warmth beside her. Neither of them rushed anything. They just lay there, her head tucked under his jaw, his hand resting at her waist, breath sinking slow and even. I worried I wouldn't know how to start over, she whispered into the dark. You didn't start over, he murmured. You started something new. August brought long days and the first signs of drought. The grass behind the barn yellowed faster than usual, and the chickens laid fewer eggs. Francesca began keeping a closer watch on the pantry, stretching the flour and salt pork further than she had before. She learned to make a thick soup from wild onions and dried beans, and when she caught Rowan watching her stir the pot, something unreadable in his eyes, she set the ladle down. What is it? She asked. He shook his head once. Just don't know how I lasted without you here. She didn't answer right away. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked over, resting her palms on either side of his face. You didn't, she said. You just endured. That night, she sat at the table and helped Elijah whittle a horse. He was more careful with the blade now, pausing between strokes to check the shape. When you and Pa got married, he said, did it make you my ma? Francesca looked at him, heart thudding. I can't take the place of the mother you lost, she said gently. But if you want me to be yours, I will be. Elijah grinned, gap-toothed and unbothered. I already figured you were. Etta came in from the porch with a letter in hand. This came from town, she said, holding it out. Francesca recognized her aunt's handwriting. She opened it slowly, scanning the neat lines. Her aunt was well, had heard of the marriage through a neighbor, and wanted to know if Francesca would consider visiting before winter. She set the letter aside without comment. Rowan glanced up from his chair. Something wrong? No, she said. Just someone from before. He didn't press, just nodded once. And later that evening, when they sat out beneath a sky full of stars, he reached over and laced his fingers through hers. I don't need to know unless you want to say. I think, she said, watching a lone bat dip through the dusk, that I'm finally where I'm meant to be. That's all. September brought wind that rattled the shutters and early frost that dusted the morning fields. Rowan built the children a small desk for their schoolwork, and Francesca sewed new curtains for the parlor windows from muslin she found in the attic. The house began to feel shaped by her hands, worn, softened, lived in. One afternoon, Etta asked to learn how to bake. Francesca tied a spare apron around her and showed her how to measure with her eyes, not just spoons. Recipes are only half the truth, she said. The rest is learning what the dough tells you. Etta furrowed her brow, sticking flour to her nose. Dough don't talk. Francesca laughed. Not with words. That evening, as the scent of baked apples filled the kitchen, Rowan pulled Francesca aside. I've been thinking of making room for a milk cow. She tilted her head. That'll mean more work. I know. He rubbed the back of his neck. But I want this place to grow, not just survive. She leaned in and kissed his cheek. Then we'll grow it together. And in the weeks that followed, they did. A fence went up near the stream, and Francesca started saving scraps for the root cellar. Etta took to feeding the goats without being asked. Elijah carved his name into the barn beam, right beside his father's. One night, as the first snow dusted the porch steps, Rowan held Francesca close by the fire, her head resting against his chest. The children were already asleep, the house quiet except for the wind curling around the eaves. I never thought love would look like this, she said. Rowan kissed the top of her head, his voice low. What does it look like? She smiled, eyes closed. Like home that doesn't need fixing. The first real snow came in the second week of November. Not the light dusting they'd seen earlier, but a quiet, heavy fall that blanketed the fields and softened the sound of hooves and boots alike. Francesca stood at the barn door just after dawn, her shawl pulled tight, watching the flakes drift down like falling feathers. Inside, the mare shifted in her stall, and the chickens rustled, uneasy in the sudden hush. Rowan stepped up beside her, brushing snow from his hat. We'll need to cut another cord of wood before the next storm. We've got enough for now, she said, glancing toward the woodshed. But I'll help stack more after breakfast. He didn't answer, just nodded and headed toward the paddock. His gait was slower lately, nothing obvious, but she'd noticed the way he rubbed his left knee after long days. She filed it away silently. He wouldn't complain. Etta and Elijah were still asleep when she returned inside. The house was cold, the stove banked low overnight. She stoked it back to life, then pulled the kettle close. As it warmed, she moved through the kitchen, quiet as snowfall, checking the bread starter, setting out the tin of dried apples, tying her hair back with a strip of linen. She didn't notice Rowan had returned until the door creaked. He stood there, snow melting in his hair, holding a parcel wrapped in brown paper. You went into town? She asked, surprised. Left before sunrise, he said, setting the package on the table. Wasn't sure if they'd have what I asked for. She untied the string. Inside was a book, worn, secondhand, but thick with pages. Across the front read, Women's Herbal Companion. I heard you talking to Mrs. Forrester after church, he said. Said you wanted to learn more about doctoring. Francesca ran her hand over the cover. I did. Well, he said, pulling off his gloves. Figured you'll be better at it than most. You notice everything. She didn't respond right away. The stove hissed softly as the kettle began to steam. I never had anyone encourage me to learn, she said at last. Back home, they said women ought to mind the laundry, not healing. Rowan leaned against the doorframe. You want to learn, you learn. I'll make sure you've got the time. Later that day, she sat at the kitchen table with the book open, a scrap of paper beside her where she jotted notes in tight, careful script. Etta came in from the parlor and perched on the bench beside her. What are you writing? Francesca turned the book so the girl could see the diagram of a wild plant. This is feverfew. for headaches and fevers. Etta traced the drawing with one finger. Can I copy it? Francesca handed her the scrap of paper and a pencil stub. If you're going to help me, you'll need to learn proper too. They spent the afternoon bent over the book, heads close. Elijah came in with a bundle of twigs and asked if he could carve a pipe for Rowan from one of them. Francesca retrieved her sewing scissors and handed him the straightest one. That evening, Rowan came in with a limp more pronounced than usual. He tried to hide it, but Francesca stepped in front of him before he could sit. Boot off, she said firmly. He sighed but obeyed. She knelt and rolled his pant leg to the knee. The joint was swollen, the skin stretched and hot. Twisted it last week when I was hauling that beam, he admitted. Figured it'd settle. It hasn't, she muttered, standing. You need rest and a compress. I've got work. You've got a wife, she said, already dampening a cloth. And I'll do the heavy lifting until you're fit again. His eyes followed her as she moved, but he didn't argue. Later, when the children were in bed and the fire burned low, he sat beside her in the rocker, his foot propped on a stool. You're not what I expected, he said quietly. She glanced at him. You've said that before. Not like this. He hesitated. You don't just fit here. You make it better. You mend more than clothes. Francesca folded her hands, unsure what to say. He reached for her, fingers brushing hers. I never thought I'd be someone a woman like you would choose. She turned to face him fully. You think I chose you because I had no other path. I think you had 1,000 paths, and you walked to me anyway. She leaned in, her lips brushing his with a quiet surety. Then she rested her head on his shoulder, listening to the wind push against the eaves. The next morning, she found Elijah in the barn, holding the half-finished pipe. I want to give it to him when he's better, he said. Francesca knelt beside him. He'll like that. I want to carve something for you too. She looked at the boy, his cheeks red from cold, eyes full of thought. Why? He tilted his head. You're ours now. Her throat tightened, but she nodded. Then I'll treasure it. By midweek, the swelling in Rowan's knee had eased, and Francesca began drying herbs in the kitchen rafters. She worked late into the evenings with her notes and Etta's careful sketches, the two of them whispering over the pages by lamplight. One night, as she tucked the children into bed, Etta reached out and touched her hand. Do you think Mama would have liked you? Francesca paused. I hope so. I think she would have, Etta said. You listen the same way she did. Francesca kissed the girl's forehead, heart aching with something tender and deep. When she returned to the parlor, Rowan was waiting with his ledger open. I ran the numbers on the new pasture fence, he said. If we're careful, we can afford the lumber come spring. She sat beside him. We'll manage. He looked at her then, truly looked, and closed the ledger. We already are. She reached for his hand, steady and warm. We're building more than a fence. And in the hush between their joined hands and the fire's soft crackle, something settled and knowing, quiet and lasting, built not from sudden passion but from shared days, steady hearts, and the kind of love that never needed proving. By early December, the last of the root vegetables had been hauled in, laid out in baskets across the pantry floor. The cellar shelves were crowded with jars sealed tight against winter-dried apples, pickled beans, and jars of lard from the butchering Rowan and Elijah had finished just after the first hard frost. The rhythm of the days had shifted. Cold seeped in through the gaps under the doors, and the sun rose late and sank fast, pressing the family closer indoors. Francesca had taken to rising before the others, lighting the stove and warming a brick for Elijah's bed. She liked the hush before footsteps filled the house, liked the way the morning light spilled in across the table. She'd sit for those few quiet minutes with a cup of warm tea and her notes, the book Rowan had given her open beside her. One morning, she found Etta curled on the parlor rug, coughing into her sleeve, her cheeks flushed too bright. It's just the air, Etta said, voice hoarse. Francesca pressed the back of her hand to the girl's brow. Too warm. She's burning. Francesca said once Rowan came in from the barn. I'll steep the whorehound and yarrow. She needs to stay in bed. Rowan nodded. I'll keep Elijah out your way. She wrapped Etta in quilts and set a basin of cool water near the bed. Through the afternoon, she brewed teas and coaxed the girl to sip from a spoon, wiping her brow with a damp cloth and humming under her breath without thinking. She didn't leave her side until the fever broke 2 days later. When Etta opened her eyes, Clearer now, she whispered. You never left. Francesca brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. I won't. That evening, Rowan stood at the stove, ladling stew into bowls while Francesca leaned against the wall, arms folded. You knew what to do, he said without turning. It didn't shake you. I was scared, she said quietly. He looked over his shoulder. You didn't show it. She stepped toward him, resting her hand on his back. I've never had to be steady for someone else before, but I'd do it again. He set the ladle down and faced her fully, the warmth from the stove casting the lines of his face in soft gold. I wanted to ask you, he said, about the land south of the creek. I've been thinking on it a while. If we clear it come spring, we could plant corn. Maybe wheat later on. She blinked, surprised. You're thinking that far ahead? He reached for her hand, rough palm closing around hers. I'm thinking of what we'll need. For all of us. She didn't speak for a moment, just held his gaze. Then I'll learn to plant corn. They sat close together at supper, the children both quiet but content. Elijah showed Rowan a wooden button he'd carved for Francesca's coat, and Etta ate half a biscuit without coaxing. The fire was warm, and the windows fogged over from the heat inside. When the children went to bed, Rowan stepped outside to check the sky. She joined him on the porch, arms wrapped around herself. The moon was bright above the barn roof, caught in a sky so clear it felt like glass. I've been wondering, she said, what it would have been like if I hadn't come here. He looked at her, breath fogging in the cold. I'd still be standing in this spot. But I'd be alone. She turned to him. I've never belonged anywhere like this. You belong here, he said, his voice firm low. With us. With me. She reached for him then, not rushed, just certain. Her hand slid beneath his coat, resting over his chest. His arms came around her, and they stood there in the cold, the warmth between them holding firm. Before the holiday, they made candles and strung dried berries near the hearth. Francesca found a bolt of wool in the attic and sewed thick socks for the children. Rowan carved a small box for her from pine, smoothing the lid until it gleamed. Inside, he tucked a folded note in his careful handwriting, offering her the deed to half the land. You built this with me, he said when she found it. It's yours. She didn't cry, not fully, but her voice caught when she read it. I never thought I'd be someone who had a place. You're not just in it, he said. You are it. They spent Christmas gathered around the fire. Etta played a hymn on her tin whistle, and Elijah gave Francesca a wooden brooch shaped like a bird's wing. After the children slept, Rowan pulled Francesca close beneath the quilt and whispered, We'll grow old here. She kissed his shoulder, her voice barely above a breath. That's all I want. Winter deepened, the fields buried under snow, but the house stayed warm. They read by lamplight, Francesca teaching Etta to bake oat bread, while Rowan showed Elijah how to mend a harness. The days passed slowly, not dull but full, shaped by small things. New seedlings started in clay pots, a second-hand chair repaired for the parlor, laughter echoing when Elijah slipped on the ice and pulled Etta down with him. When the first thaw came in March, Rowan and Francesca stood hand in hand at the edge of the south field, boots sunk in the softening earth. The sky was pale and wide, the land stretching out before them with promise. He didn't speak, just squeezed her hand once before turning toward the barn. She watched him go, her heart settled, strong. She knew now what it was to be chosen not out of convenience or desperation, but because someone saw your whole self and stayed. That spring, she planted corn with her sleeves rolled and her back aching, and when the shoots broke through the soil, she wept quietly into Rowan's shoulder, joy so full it hurt. By midsummer, the field was green with life. The children ran between rows, chasing each other through the stalks while Francesca stood on the porch, one hand resting over the gentle rise beneath her apron. When Rowan stepped beside her, his eyes dropped to her hand. Are you sure? She nodded. I'm sure. He didn't speak, just pulled her into his arms, his breath warm against her neck. They named the baby Clara, after Rowan's mother. Etta helped sew the swaddling cloth, and Elijah carved a cradle rail smooth as glass. Francesca held the child with awe, not fear. She knew now what it was to be rooted. Years passed. The house grew, one room at a time. The land thrived under their hands. Francesca taught Etta to grind herbs and read Weather in the Wind. Rowan taught Elijah to plow straight and build strong. Clara grew into a bright-eyed girl with Francesca's laugh and Rowan's quiet gaze. And when the sun dipped behind the hills each evening, Rowan and Francesca still stood together on the porch, hands clasped, the land before them, the house behind. What they built would last because it had been shaped not just by labor, but by love, steady and deep, earned and kept. They lived the rest of their days like that side by side, hearts sure, never alone again.